Okay, next session. I am personally a bit of a music nut, and I'm very glad that this session, therefore, is all about music. We all know and recognize the power of music to ourselves, and we certainly also recognize the power of music for brand communications. Many of us can sing or hum jingles or tunes or pieces of music that have been used in advertising throughout the years. But how do you make the best use of music in today's super fragmented, noisy, ADD marketing environment? Well, we have two excellent people to talk about that here today. Ruth Simmons, who is CEO of Songseekers International, and Cliff Fluid, who is a partner at law firm Lewis Silken, but who are also generous and respected partners of the Festival of Media. So I'd like to invite them to the stage, and then we can listen to how to effectively use music in today's marketing environment.
That was a bit of a journey. Thank you for choosing to come into this session today. We are a bit of a select group, but I hope today what Cliff and I will share with you will give you a competitive advantage. Music has been part of my life for a very long time, and music and advertising has changed. It's been quite a journey along the way for advertising industry and for the music industry. It's in the beginning when I came in, and I was there at the very beginning, so people that are doing some calculations can estimate what a lady's age is. But it was about, over the last 30 years, it started with jingles, and then it went on to be commissioned music, and then suddenly copyright came along. But the whole point of this, of using music in advertising, was to help use the music to support the brand, to tell a compelling story. When digitization came into existence, and we're talking in the last 5 or 6 years, for the agency, this had a very, very big impact because music was available for more and more music was available for more and more people, and anybody who had a computer could access music from lots of different places. But what that also did was, with the digitization and the opportunities that were afforded to the agency to talk to their consumers on different platforms, it meant there were a lot more digital agencies and a lot more people talking about their brand using music to tell the story. From the music industry's point of view, the artist also was in a difficult situation. So the artists themselves were suddenly faced with the value of music being literally into nothing, and their revenue streams from traditional revenue was now a joke. So somebody who is a major artist could have to wait 10 years to receive anything similar to a sync fee. So what this did is it enabled more and more artists who were previously shy to actually say yes for the first time. And that meant there were bigger artists and bigger songs, and the licensing situation had to change. And I know that Cliff is going to be talking about that later. From my point of view, I was there when the original license was issued. How does the brand associate with an artist? How does the brand allow a third person into the bed and enable this relationship to go on, and enable the relationship that they have with their own consumer, which is their fan, and the person who enjoys the music, to exist in another area? I actually started life as a scientist. And as a scientist, I was trained to look at the what, the why, the how, and the where. And as a scientist, I was constantly frustrated because even though I've been in this business for a long time, they say you can take the girl out the science, but you can't take the science out the girl. So I kept looking to see what was going on with the music and why the music industry would supply chart material, which is, or the number of click-throughs as recently, but there was no measurement, no real measurement from the advertiser's side as to say how that music was working. Now, there's a big challenge that you have, because if you are an advertiser, the story is, if you put a big song on a commercial in the editing, and when you're presenting it to client, and it goes into research, it will pass, because the benchmarks that the people like Millward Brown use and Ipsos uses, do you like it and do you remember it? And of course, if it's a big track, you like it and you remember it. So for me, the question is, just because you have the ability to use this music, and just because a record company is coming to you and saying you can use this artist or this brand, just because you can use it, does it mean you should? The big problems for me, and they've been constant frustrations, and you speak to any music supervisor, the frustration is that when you are, for me, I never as a music supervisor got a proper brief beyond anthemic and uplifting. I never saw the brand personality. I never see the objectives of the campaign. What I get is the PA to the TV producer phone through and say, it's anthemic and uplifting. And I wish that I'd had £1 for every time somebody had given me that brief, because I have no idea what it means, and if anybody in the room knows what it means, please come and tell me. The second thing that I couldn't understand is why the creatives changed things in the editing suite at that last minute. It was a scramble. It meant doing our job for licensing became really difficult. And because we were, but the real challenge for me was the benchmark for success, which is, and when we were sending in playlists, I'll know it when I hear it. The question for me is, if I, as a scientist, is I know it when I hear it, the gut reaction from 2 or 3 people in an editing suite, where the music means something to them personally, is that instinct really enough? Millward Brown did a piece of research for Brand Sense, and they found that they were looking at the role of music in a commercial, and they found that although it was 50% of the experience for the consumer, it wasn't actually 50% of the investment of time, and it wasn't 50% of the money that was actually spent on the music. Do brands use a lot of music? They certainly do. In the UK alone, Clearcast, who clock the amount of tracks that are used, clocked 36,000 commercials last year, and 28,000 of those were using music of some kind. So we do use a lot of music, and the consumer is listening to a lot of music. My frustration with all this is going on, and sometimes you can't be out there on your own. You have to collaborate with people. And I wanted to know whether or not I was the only person who was feeling this, other than the music industry itself. And so I went to speak to John Hegarty, and this is a man who he knows just a bit about music in commercials. And he gave us his blessing. He said, no, you really need to go out and do this. It's a really important piece of research. And the research results were quite painful. What we found was we had allocated 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and it became like a therapy session. People were offloading the whole time. You can download this from this particular website, and I have got hard copies here for you privileged people, and there's probably just enough for all of you. What was really interesting, it was really painful all the way through. The creative director held his ground. He actually said that he wanted, that his instinct was really, really important, and he actually doesn't want to talk to anybody else. It's subjective, it's personal, and he gets on with it. The poor agency TV producers found it the most painful. And what was really interesting is that the one which says, he said that the man who turned around and said, I can't bear it when I see music in the margins because I don't sleep for 6 weeks until it's on air. But he also says he avoids meetings with the creatives because they don't want to be confined by practicalities. It makes his job more difficult. The brand manager didn't know anything about it. He didn't know anything was going wrong, other than something which I'll come back to later. But he had no benchmarks. The agency were offering him no benchmarks, or the research companies were offering no benchmarks. But for me, this was a really important slide and comments from the research companies that we interviewed, when they realized that actually maybe everybody was missing a beat. Everybody wasn't looking at sound. They looked at every other aspect, but here's something that makes up 50% of the experience, and we're not looking at it at all. So why do brands use music? Brands use music. It's not just to complete the silence, to fill in the silence. They use the music because they want to connect. Everybody talks about it. They talk about the powerful relationship. And the problem is when they say they want to cut to the emotional part of the consumer, my big question to them is, you want to cut to the emotional part, but what part do you want to cut to? Because you like music, I like music, but we like different music. And I like different music at different times of the day, and I like different music because it sets me in a different place. If I'm on the treadmill, I want one type of music. If I'm sitting relaxing at home with a glass of wine, I want something else. There's 4 stages in using music, in processing music. I hear music. That means the music plays, I'm aware that I'm hearing the music. It's just a purely physical action. This is an interesting one. I hear the music, I process the music, I'm asking myself questions like, where do I know this song from? Who's singing it? Where was I at the time? Who was I with? What was I doing? It's like going through a mental filing cabinet. And then, once I've figured that out, I get into the emotional stage. And when I get past the emotional stage, I get into the physical stage. I tap my foot, the hairs on the back of my head and neck go on end, and more importantly, I'm asking myself, how do I feel about this? And for you as brands, you want to know, is this music connecting quickly enough to make me buy? Now, it's a very strong it's a very strong process, and it's a very difficult process, and it's a very fast process. And you don't want people sitting between 1 and 2 asking themselves lots of cognitive questions, because in that valuable space, the consumer is going to go onto Sky and skip and go on to, or skip ad or go on the Sky Plus. This is a commercial that is probably very familiar to you. I still love the bit where the gorilla does this. There was a lot of conversation about this commercial. It was a brilliant piece of work, and lots of people had lots of suggestions. The music absolutely worked. But the challenge for Cadbury's, even though their agency produced a lot of great commercials afterwards, they couldn't figure out what it was that they did in order to make this commercial the success it was. And what we need to do is start to look at what is going on in this commercial that will enable you. And I'm going to play you another piece of music. What you're actually listening to is nearly $1 million mistake. It was a near miss for one of our clients, and this was a big song, The Circle of Life. I have no idea why the agency chose it, other than the fact that it was a cat food and about a cat being feral and living a wild life, and this piece of music came from The Lion King. But The Circle of Life, the lyrics didn't match it at all. And Mars put this out, and I'm going to have to speed up because I'm watching the clock here. And Mars put this out they had this commercial that went out with an animatic. They're a very, very good client of ours, and they researched very heavily. And what happened for them was that they put it out in the animatic, it ticked all the boxes. When it came back after 6 months of being out on air and the post-production testing, it didn't tick any of the boxes. And the only thing that had been changed was the music in the editing suite. And I want to show you the set of results because they came to us and said, what is going on? Can one piece of music change what I see and what I hear? This was what was the results. We tested The Circle of Life by Elton John against The Circle of Life, the instrumental version from the show, and we tested that against the original piece of music that went out on pre-production and the new piece of music, new piece of commissioned music that was put on at the end. And you can see quite clearly that Elton John doesn't work. Elton John gets in the way at that cognitive stage. Elton John they think about The Lion King, they think about Elton John, they think about his personality. We got closer with the instrumental version, and what you can see quite clearly here is that the two versions, the original version that was tested, scored much better. These are 5 things that I would suggest you do when you're starting to use music. It will start to bring your music selections to a much higher level, and it'll probably save you money. Sorry. And the question I have for you is, I always think money always focuses the mind, and I say to my clients, so how much money do you spend on music? How much do you know about the music you use? Do you know how much you spent? And I think you probably do know that, but do you know the RMI on the music? Do you understand what's working for you and what's not working for you? And these are very, very important questions. For us, the Mars research took us into much deeper levels. The good news and the bad news is that there's not a lot. The good news is that people are looking at it like Will Brown. The bad news is that the research is still thin on the ground. And as I said, we're looking at things that are very, very interesting, like the instrumental, does the prospective buyer respond differently to the existing buyer? And how does it work for brand fit? This is a piece of research that was done by Professor Charles Spence at Oxford University on brand fit. That's how well the piece of music fits with everything that you know and understand about your brand. And 1200% for me, he says, is a super additive effect of 1200% when the music is harmonious with what you're seeing. What you're seeing is what you're hearing. But more interesting is this 25%, which turns around and says the propensity to buy your brand is increased. It's very difficult when you're talking to creatives, and creativity research does sometimes suck the life out of a piece of creativity, and the creatives will say, I know it when I hear it, and as a creative benchmark, it's fantastic. But you can today, science and creativity can work together to produce music that matters to you, matters to your brand, and matters to your sales. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It always works the second time. Good afternoon. My name's Cliff. I'm a partner at the law firm Lewis Silkin. I have two areas of specialism, being digital media and brand entertainment. So those beautifully converge around this particular subject. I've been working in this area for nigh on 20 years now, and it doesn't seem to be changing, apart from the fact of actually more and more people wanting to do it, more and more money being spent, and as I would argue, possibly some of it being spent really quite badly. So what I want to do is go beyond the idea of using music ad as a sync or in the background or as a contextual piece, but actually move to this idea of brand partnerships, which is happening more and more. And back when I started in the music industry, this was very much an artist's view of them being personally associated with a product, brand, or service. It was seen simply as selling out. Whereas now, everything is a lot different. And it's really clear that much of the value for artists in the future will come from brands and marketing rather from music sales. You'll have heard what the debates about what artists make from streaming, what they've been making for the music industry from years and years. Brand money is second only to live. And if you're an emerging artist who doesn't have a huge touring income, sync income, music brand partnerships may be your primary source of revenue. And what the great news on that means is that actually that the more and more that the brands are looking for work with branded content, the artists want to work with them more, everybody needs to do more. However, with that significant opportunity comes a real challenge of two very different business models and very different types of approach coming together. Now, I've had the pleasure of working on a significant number of these that have gotten to market over the years, and you'll have heard of people like Bacardi and Cadbury and Coke and Nike working with artists in a deep and integrated way. And what I would say is that you're probably more aware of the successes. However, in my privileged position as a lawyer, I get to see the graveyard of these deals, and it's a very, very, very big graveyard because a huge number of these deals never actually make it to any form of amplification. So the real issue is that actually that music will need brands as much as brands will need music. So you would think there's a huge opportunity to work together. And deals that you'd never have thought would have been possible years ago are doable now. But actually the truth is it takes a completely different way of working together. It's not simply buying a track. It's not a retail transaction. It is genuinely a partnership. And it's at that point of the partnership where it normally falls down. So why are they so hard? Well, with my tongue firmly in my cheek, but not very hard, I'm going to tell you what a brand partnership normally looks like, or certainly in my experience anyway. So the agency will come up with the idea of a brand partnership, and they'll say, look, actually, I've got a friend who knows the manager really, really well. This will be fine. We'll just call them up, and we'll go into bed together. And then what will happen is they'll make a pitch. There's only one artist, and it can only possibly one artist, and they'll just get in, they'll speak to the senior marketing person at the brand, and they go, yeah, go for it, it's great. £1,000,000, no more, done. So then what will happen is that they'll call up the manager, and they'll come up with a deal. And the artist manager will say, well, what's the budget? And for some strange reason, the agency then tells them the budget, and, you know, a headline fee of that £1,000,000 is quoted and agreed in principle, subject to the legals. So then someone like me gets involved and gets instructed, and they'll say, okay, well, for this £1,000,000, what are you buying? Who's going to own it? How are you going to clear it? How are you going to amplify it? And all these horrible points of detail that at that point, nobody really wants to focus on. So the legal clock starts ticking, the amplification clock starts ticking, and then we need to point out, well, look, you've spoken to the management, but you have to go and speak to the record company, and the record company haven't been told about this, and they own and control most of the rights that you're going to need. So you're going to go and speak to the record label. You're also going to have to say, well, you're going to want to use music, so you're going to need to speak to the guys who are the songwriters. You'll have assumed somewhat sensibly that those are all the right people, but actually they're not. They're a completely different stakeholder with a completely different agenda. And also the big secret is that if the record company wants to be able to give its rights, they will take all of the money first, and it will go to the artist's unrecouped balance. That's to say, the whole raison d'etre of the deal goes to the record label and not to the artist. So at that point, you're starting to see the budget inflate, and you're also starting to see the interest of the artist deflate at that particular instance. Then you get this wonderful clause that happens in the negotiations called most favoured nations, which means no particular stakeholder can earn any more than I do. So at that point, the budget may double, sometimes triple at that point, and everyone starts to get a bit nervous. So the lawyer has to go back and do what we normally do, which is break bad news and say to everyone, look, bad news, the fees have gone up quite significantly, and I wish I was talking about the legal fees, but I'm not. The parties decide they're too far in to pull out, so they're going to continue. But the problem is that the increased fees from the amplification get taken out of that and go to clearance fees. And then someone draws in the brand CMO who's starting to ask some pretty awful questions. And then what you've got is that the artist is making less money, everybody else is getting more, so it pulls out from the media and the amplification dies. The artist is getting a reduced fee, and therefore they're not so much into it, and they want to have absolute approval over everything, otherwise it doesn't happen. So that starts to mean everything that's been shot can no longer be used. The event takes place, and unfortunately, because you can't use all the music rights, you can't use it for as long, the platform is significantly reduced, the artist isn't bothered to do those tweets anymore, and then won't approve it. You get a CMO that swears, you know what, we're never going to do anything like this again. So why do they keep going wrong? And unfortunately, it's the same issues again and again and again. There's a genuine failure to appreciate the variety of all the stakeholders involved. You have an artist, you have an agent, you have a manager, you have a record company, you have music publishers, you have a significant number of people who are in the value chain. Whereas you think you're just doing a deal with the artist, right? It comes down to the legal issues about who owns what, who controls what, but also it's really the fundamental competing commercial interests that stop these things from happening. And the established licensing models that normally take place just don't fit. The world of music licensing is about giving you as little as possible for the most amount of money, whereas a genuine brand partnership should be about bringing value to the table. So all of the classic issues come in place. Who's getting what? Who's owning what? Who's controlling what? Who has to say yes before it can be amplified, even if you've spent the thick end of 7 or indeed 8 figures to have created the material? Who's responsible for clearing the underlying rights? Who's going to pay for it? Very, very rarely do I actually see that being considered, let alone budgeted. You've got big issues when it comes to artists, where very late in the day someone will say, and just to be clear, you can't slag off the brand. Whereas the artist will say, hang on a second, you've come to me because I'm edgy and I'm authentic. How does that work? And this is probably the biggest issue I have, is exclusivity. You as a brand will be expecting to put this huge investment in a world where actually you do not want the artist working with any other brands. And in too many deals, I'm seeing at the very last minute, someone coming in and saying, yeah, just to tell you, they're doing 3 other car deals at the moment. Is that all right? And unfortunately, a lot of the time, people just sort of nod because they've spent so much money and time, they're very embarrassed. There's also a really odd view in relation to value. What were the outputs? What did everyone expect to get going in? What could the artist get out of it? And how could you barter data, insight, likes, and all of the other issues that each party can look to the value chain, rather than saying, how much of your credibility can I buy, Mr. Artist, or indeed Mrs. Artist? So how do you make these things work? Well, what I would say is that you actually need a 360-degree view of the rights you have, not control. What tends to happen is that you end up with 2 parties fighting for control, when actually the whole point about control is completely illusory. A colleague of mine described it, we have 5 bald men fighting over a comb here. Let it go. Focus on the rights you have and see how they can be amplified in a 100% and 360 way, rather than keep going on about, well, you said you'd do 7 tweets and you've only done 3. Value the deals upon the rights that you're actually able to get and the approvals that you get. And most importantly, genuinely identify all of the people in the value chain first, not last. Both parties have really got to understand the importance of reputation and exclusivity to a brand. Every one of the major record labels now has a brand partnerships division, and their role is to sell as many of these for as many of these artists as possible. Yet they continue to be surprised when a brand wants exclusivity. You need to build in systems to making sure that things can be activated and approved. And actually, how about this, brands? How about tiering the remuneration and the fee against the actual rights and approvals you actually get? And lastly, engage with the process and all of the stakeholders. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to bear the risk? And who's going to take the most out of the investment? Thank you.